Hello chess friends and welcome to that of chess channel and welcome back to our Slav defense series. So in this series we're covering this very nice opening from a white's and from black's perspective, and today we're continuing again with the Slav defense with the so-called Soultanbeieff variation. And we have talked about the Soultanbeieff variation as a great response to white's play with some interesting ideas for white and for black. We have talked about also some other ideas of in the Slav defense, but in my opinion really the Soultanbeieff approach to play as black is simply one of the best ways to beat basically white's play. And today I've prepared two interesting games, one great gameplay by Stockfish as white in the Soultanbeieff variation, but also one great gameplay as black here by Stockfish in the Soultanbeieff variation. I think these are sort of cornerstone games that you can use in order to get a better understanding of this particular line. If you want to study of course the Slav, I think that the Soultanbeieff variation is something that you should be really familiar with, because there are of course other ideas, other lines, but this is simply an approach that you must know, I think, and this is sort of an approach that I think you can use in order to beat white. But also of course from white's perspective you see now also a very interesting approach of Stockfish here. So let's check out now the Soultanbeieff variation. Let's see what are the differences between the Soultanbeieff and some other lines. Here d4 we're playing knight to f6, knight to f3, d5. Of course the move order can be different, but now c4. Here it's a game in which Stockfish is playing now as white. After the move c4 we have c6, so far the Slav defense, and now after the move knight to c3 we have reached the 3 knights variation. Whenever we have this 3 knights variation, my recommendation as black is here simply to play d takes c4. Now a4 has to be played. We have analyzed also the Alekhine variation with e3 and similar ideas. We have also analyze the Geller gambit with the move e4, but the a4 is a calm line. It's really one of the best ways here from white's perspective to proceed. Simply we're preventing of course the move b5. Now we're playing of course e3, and then we have the opportunity to recapture the pawn c4. So now I think again that the best way here for black is simply to proceed with the move e6. There are of course other lines. We have analyzed bishop to f5, bishop to g4 as some opportunities here for black, but in my opinion e6 is simply the best way here, simply trying to open the position here. We're developing of course the Dartful bishop. Now with c5 we can even break through here. So the main goal, as we talked about already in the Soultanbeieff variation from black perspective, is to get this isolated pawn on d4 and then create a blockade around the square d5. If you want to get a better understanding of this particular video, please also watch my previous video, because you see now in the continuation how we can create an isolated pawn here for white. So in the continuation after the move e6, now we have e3, but now comes the move c5. And of course we have talked about this idea. If you take d takes c5, it's not so good. We can immediately take out the queen, king to d1, and now after bishop takes c5, I think black has solved now all of the positional problems. I don't think that white has anything here in this position. I think even that black is simply slightly better. So that's why after the move bishop to c4, you see now we're continuing simply the pressure, knight to c6, casting, and now after the move c takes d4, we have now e takes d4. And now we have reached, I think, a very interesting position in which black has created this isolated pawn for white. An isolated pawn sometimes can be a weakness, doesn't have to be necessarily a weakness in the continuation of the game, but I still think that white is not satisfied with this isolated pawn now on d4. You would love, of course, to advance the pawn, you would love, of course, to get rid of it, but so far it's not possible, because many times after an e7, bishop to f4, here castling, rook to c1, now knight to b4 will happen in the continuation of the game, and black is trying now the powerful blockade around the square d5, because we have already from white's perspective advanced the pawn on a4. Now the powerful blockade around the square d5 cannot be prevented anymore in the continuation of the game. So that's why you see now this Stockfish approach while playing this Soultanbeieff variation as white with the move bishop to f4. I think it's very interesting. You see now why, because here Stockfish allows simply after a move rook to c1, the basically why black doesn't have any more good moves. You cannot play bishop to d7. If bishop to d7 happens, then you're allowing your opponent basically to play the move queen to e2, and now rook to d1. Then this isolated pawn would be supported, and then we could break through with the move d5. Even here b6 is not an opportunity, because you get simply d5, and finally white got rid of this isolated pawn, is breaking through with a very nice piece activity. So that's why it's perfectly fine here for the position. So that's why you have to play here from black's perspective the move knight to b4. But I still kind of like really the Stockfish approach with the move bishop to f4 and then rook to c1 without playing with the queen, because the queen would love of course to play queen to e2. So far you see, if you play now for instance immediately the move queen to e2, then you risk of course knight takes d4. Here knight takes d4, queen to d4, and okay, white has maybe some opportunities to attack and kick away the queen a little bit further in the continuation of the game, but I don't think that it brings so much white here in the continuation of the game. First of course we have to play bishop to e3, then maybe queen to g4 will happen, or queen to d8, so you can maybe chase a little bit around the queen, but I don't think that white gained so much in this position, so although you get some tempi of course. So that's why you see many times white is trying this idea, queen to e2, then rook to d1, but that's not possible because the black has a very powerful attack around the square d4. So that's why you see Stockfish plays here a little bit around this move queen to e2, waits now here black to play the move knight to b4, and now knight to e5 can be played, and here comes this main idea, the main blockade idea of the Soultanbeieff variation from black perspective. It's the blockade against this isolated pawn. Whenever you face an isolated pawn, we have talked about these ideas in our previous videos. When you have an isolated pawn, of course it's very important to create a blockade. And now comes, I think, a very interesting approach of Stockfish here. What to do? Your bishop is hanging here. Stockfish plays an interesting move, bishop to e3. Bishop to e3 seems like a strange idea because you're giving up your bishop pair, but what Stockfish had in mind here is now a very powerful control of the d4 square, because now after knight takes e3, which Stockfish opponent played here, we have f takes e3, and now this is not an isolated pawn anymore, which is very comfortable center now that white has gained here. In the continuation of the game here, black tried knight takes c6, we have knight to c6, knight takes c6, b takes c6, and now knight to e4. Although the black has the bishop pair here on the board, but I think the activity that white gained here, we can notice still that this bishop on c8 is a little bit bad here. It doesn't have good squares. You see this pawn is isolated, and now although as we said black has the bishop pair, but white has also very powerful control of the c5, so black would love of course to advance the pawn on c5, getting this bishop pair active, but with the move knight to e4 white has prevented this idea. So here b3 was played by Stockfish, simply fixing the position here. Queen to a5, we have queen to f3, queen to f5, we have knight to c5, and now after move queen to f3, rook to f3, and here after move a5. The problem is, I think this one you cannot play the move e5. You would love to do that, but then you get simply rook to f1. That's the main issue. You see you have simply too much pressure here around the square f7, so you're tactically lost here. So after the move rook to f3, here we have a5, we have rook to f1, h6, and now here Stockfish advanced the pawn simply on e4. If you give up of course the bishop for the knight here, then here the d takes c5 will happen, and see now still this is a bad bishop which is blocked out by its own pawns. We have the battery here on the f file. You cannot play bishop to a6, so it's of course a comfortable game. So I don't want to show you now the whole game. This from this point on, after move rook to f3, still the game is equal. Stockfish won the game, but as I said, I wanted to show you this approach. That's simply a video in which we're trying to search for a good approach here. So after this isolated pawn, when you get the isolated pawn, I think really that one of the most aggressive ideas is simply to play bishop to f4 like Stockfish did here, castling, and now here rook to c1, trying simply to delay the situation a little bit. We have said that basically black doesn't have good moves here. Black needs to make something happen. Bishop to d7 is passive. You get d5 or similar ideas. After b6 again you get d5, so that's why black needs to play the move knight to b4, but now we can play also knight to e5, knight to d5, bishop to e3, retreating. That's the most important thing. And now we're waiting if of course black takes, knight takes e3, f takes e3. At least we have solved the isolated pawn situation. So let's see now Stockfish approach as black in the Soultanbeieff variation. Again here c6, knight to f3, so again knight to c3, we have the three knights variation. Again d takes c4, again a4, and now we're playing e6. We have e3 by white, and now c5, like usual, we're breaking in the center. Again, we're trying to force this isolated pawn situation. We have bishop to c4, c takes d4, e takes d4, and now bishop to e7, castling here, queen to e2. Now finally, because Stockfish delayed the situation, didn't play here immediately knight to c6, it was possible now for white to play the move queen to e2 because the pawn on d4 is not hanging. Now rook to d1 will happen, and at least white has defended this position. White will defend this isolated pawn and will try to advance it then afterwards with the move d5. Okay, and as I said, there are weaknesses in white's position. There are also some good ideas here for white, because what we can notice, I think, always from black's perspective, is that black doesn't have this the good bishop. The bishop on c8 is simply bad. You don't have such a great activity. We have said b6 is a little bit too slow, so that's why in order to develop the light square bishop, you have to play something like bishop to d7, maybe then afterwards bishop to c6, maybe then knight to d7. So although you gained something here, as we said, isolated pawn, but still you have lack of development here from black's perspective. So here in the game, knight to c6 was played by Stockfish. Here rook to d1 by Stockfish's opponent. We have knight to b4, again the idea, as we said, simply a blockade around the square d5, and here knight to e5, similar position like in the game before. And now comes a very interesting idea here by Stockfish, bishop to d7, because when we evaluate now the strength of our minor pieces, we can agree that this bishop is bad by black, so it's a bad piece. The knight on e5, it's a great piece, so I'm not sure if black will really ever give up this knight for this bishop. So you see, nothing dramatically has changed. I think black has now a good position with opportunities then afterwards to play the move knight to d5, cementing the position around the square d5. So it's a playable game here for black, although you have lost the bishop pair in an early stage of the game. But as we said, you basically gave up a good piece here from white's perspective against a bad piece, so you shouldn't do that. So here in the continuation, here h3 was played by white. Now Stockfish tried rook to bishop to e8. If you don't want to take out the bishop now immediately, now we can retreat. And now after the move a5, here rook to c8, very interesting approach again by Stockfish. You see, although this position is a little bit weird, I think, but at least Stockfish gained some activity. The rook is playing, both of these knights are playing, bishops are playing, so at least some kind of a development. And I think if you want to study the Soultanbeieff variation, if you want to play the Soultanbeieff variation, this is sort of approach that we can use. Let's see now what Stockfish did in the continuation. Bishop to b3, we have h6 preventing bishop to g5, you see, because if bishop to g5 happens, the bishop is of course attacking the knight is protecting the square d5, which we want to basically block out. We want to further create this blockade around the square d5, so that's why queen to f3 attacking simply. Now bishop to c6. So you see, again, Stockfish doesn't mind to give up the bishop for knight. Here finally white took knight takes c6. We have b takes c6, and now after move knight to e4, knight takes e4, queen to e4, but now bishop to g5. Very interesting idea here again by Stockfish. Tries to simplify the position by trading off more pieces. Getting rid of the bishop pair is sometimes really a great strategy. When you play with the bishop and a knight against the bishop pair, then one of your main strategies is really to give up, to trade off at least one of these bishops, so white wouldn't have then anymore the strength of the bishop pair. So now even if you try bishop to f4, it's not so good, because bishop to f6 will happen, and still we can play this powerful blockade around the square d5. Now suddenly white starts with bishop becomes really the worst minor piece on the board, because it's simply blocked out by its own pawn. So that's why here in the continuation, Stockfish opponent tried bishop to c4. We have rook to b8, b3, bishop takes c1, here rook to c1, and here I want to also to stop. It's not the point that we're analyzing now the game, what happens if that happens. I wanted to show you, as we said, simply an approach here in the continuation of the game. I think now, even with the blockade idea around the square d5, at least black has solved now the position. Still, we have also this target, the b3. Maybe in long terms we can also try c5. Stockfish had different ideas in mind. Stockfish played, of course, again, a brutal attack, but as an approach we can use both of these games as a cornerstone from white and from black perspective. So as said, here let's go back. After move a4, as said, e6, in my opinion, really one of the best ways to play as black the Slav defense in the 3 knights variation. Now e3 c5, isolated pawn on d4, bishop to e7, knight to c6, knight to b4, as we said, then cementing the position around the square d5. Great idea. So if you put now the evaluation in the PGN into this Stockfish 13 engine, it will show you already an equal game. So that's basically your goal when you're playing as black. So now after move knight to d5, you see we have cemented the position. Now knight to e5, bishop to d7. You don't mind if your opponent wants to trade off the knight for a bishop. You don't mind, because this is bad piece anyway. Still we have a great protection of the d5 square, h3, bishop to e8 here, as I said, rook to c8, and it was an equal game for both sides, although Stockfish won this game from black perspective. So I'll show you both of these games in the description below. You can analyze maybe the whole games. The point of our instructive videos, instructive opening videos, it's not the point that we're seeing some great games with some great winning games and similar ideas. I think it's very important for us to find good ideas in the opening, and I think you have now a decent setup for white, for black, if you want, of course, to play the Soultanbeieff variation. In my opinion, as I said, the Soultanbeieff is really one of the best ways in the 3 knights variation. So okay, I hope that you realize these ideas, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. We have, as I said, talked about recently also about the Soultanbeieff, so you should probably watch these videos combined. If you want to study the Slav defense more, please check out my whole series on the Slav defense. Here's the link. And if you have trouble maybe to play as black, check out my Ne5 in the defense series and my hyper accelerated Sicilian defense series as good responses to d4 and e4. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.